Anyway, my point is, I thought that showing the kids in the motels was just sort of like, hey, look at these miserable, sad creatures. And I thought going to the school was redemption. It was a way of showing that there was some hope, that with the right education and the right direction or some help, these kids could go on the right track and they get some education, they have a future. And as the teacher says, you know, yeah, half the kids are going straight to jail or going straight to the bad, dark side. But there is hope. The Oz kids, those boys, they all will go to college. We set up college funds for them. Maybe if they get to, I think like half of them will at least get to college if they stay in school. And I thought the school provided, and I think they got teased, they got beat up. Remember the little kid that was crying because he was getting teased because his older brother or older sister? He had already been through 5 schools. I mean, he'd been through a lot of, in a regular school population, they make fun of you for having the same clothes every day. I'm not defending the school. I mean, I just happened to end up in Orange County.
But you think it offered stability?
I thought it offered stability. And I also thought that because this was Orange County, you had to be fair to show that Orange County was trying to do something about it. Regardless of the politics of the law, and it was grandfathered in that it could stay at that school, I did think with the Real Housewives of OC and that reputation of California, like when people talk about California, this is the California they're talking about, like the huge homes and the fancy cars and the Huntington Beach, the surf, skate mentality, all comes out of this zip code. The same zip code where all these kids live is, first of all, it's across the street from Disneyland. So you've all been to Disneyland. It costs like $50 to go to Disneyland, whatever. They sell you that dream, and like right across the street are all these homes. Like these people are all the parents are working at Disneyland. You would see at Disneyland the cast members, that's what they were called, coming home and they're out, you know, like, hey, there's Donald Duck walking through the Fleabag motel parking lot. You know, it's like, that's sort of sad that they are manufacturing this fiction all day and then they go home to their Fleabag sad, desperate life. And I thought that Orange County showed that, the stark of like rich, poor, it was a nice place to show it. But I also thought that the community deserved some credit for addressing the issue. Because the Department of Education was funding that, at least until your friend wrote the letter.
All right, so let me get you 4 folks.
Was a news nut and spent a decade at NBC, I can tell you, from the network perspective and also from my job now as a quote-unquote filmmaker. The one thing you have to remember whenever you're reading the newspaper or watching TV or seeing documentaries is the people you're seeing are the people that allow you to film. And when I went to Orange County, and I went to the Department of Education and I said, I want to go to your public school and see those homeless. Do you think they would ever grant me access into a public school? Of course they said no. In fact, they said, what is your agenda? They gave me the whole, because you know, this is the beauty, we love Michael Moore, but he destroyed an access for every other working filmmaker. And so, they didn't let me film. I would have loved to get into the public school, but they didn't allow me. With a lot of the kids in the motel, they didn't all go to Hope School. They went to the regular public schools, but the public schools wouldn't allow me to film. So that's why, and that's sort of one of the great deceits of journalism, is that you tell the story they let you tell. And guess what? Hope School, nobody cared if I went in there with a camera. So, you know, they're like, oh, there's the homeless kids, who cares? But in the real school, they had, you know, your kids go to schools, they don't want cameras walking around, film, you know, so a lot of privacy issues and all that. So I say it's my own, you know, I didn't get access. And access is the currency in journalism. That's what, you know, that's why there's this sick dance with all, like the White House press corps, why they dance around the candidate, and they all need access, and so they won't tell you the truth. Because, okay, sorry, I'm going too far. But this is why I retired from NBC, was because I was tired of playing this game in which we don't tell you the stories of how many times George Bush farted in our face because he thought it was funny. We can't say that because it's politically incorrect, because it's cute when he does it to us, but to say that on TV, that's not part of the game. It's a fraternity, and you get access by playing this game and not ever offending. If you ask the candidate some question he doesn't want to answer, he never calls on you again, and then you're sort of castrated as a journalist. You know, so you have to be really polite and politically correct, and it's this complicated dance. And so that is why, when we talk about the Department of Education, the conversations I had with them, forget about it. And pass the mic to somebody else, because I'm going.
I'm sorry, but how many times did George Bush fart in your face?
No, but the other thing was like he had I'm sorry, I know there are a lot of ladies in the room, and I don't mean to be, because I'm not. I'm a lady, I'm a mother, and I don't talk like this. But I was a young lady covering the campaign, and I would sit there, and he would talk about his penis, and I'd be like, I am a lady, why are you talking about how this ice cream makes your penis hard? I don't need to know that. But they don't tell you that, and when it's like a male bonding thing. I think he thought it was cute, and the guys loved it, and I thought that the press coverage was always a lot more flattering than it should have been, because you'd think liberal media, they should be, but it was sort of, he gave good playing, we used to say about George Bush. He knew how to come and put his arm around you, and he'd flirt with the girls and the guys alike. He was better at flirting with the New York Times reporter, gay man, than he was with flirting with me. And so you always have to remember, and I know you're a sophisticated crowd, so you can take it, and you always have to remember that journalism is a complicated equation of access and... Go ahead, you're a journalist, ask another question. Someone take the mic. When you're homeless, you leave your door open and you let people come in and hang out with you. And a lot of these kids were unattended during the day. So I would just go watch TV with them and hang out with them. And I had a rental car, and they sat in my rental car and just listened to the radio. They're not, you're thinking of it from a perspective, you consume way too much media. You're thinking like, how'd you get access? You walk into a homeless motel and people invite you into their hotel room and they talk to you because they have nothing to lose. They're not staged, and it's not the cardboard cutout like John Edwards on the campaign trail where he's pretending to be this teen idol or something. It's a different relationship, and that was the refreshing part about this movie, is I never had to deal with any, well, besides the Department of Education, I never had to deal with any handlers. I didn't have anyone minding me and saying, last question. They let me in because I showed an interest in them. And remember, you saw Zach, Brewster, and you saw the kids talking about how they didn't ever get attention. Remember Gabriel, the one who shaved his head, who's Gabriel? Remember? Anyway, you saw him talking about how he never gets any attention. These kids were starving for attention. So when I would just go hang out with them in their hotel rooms, they liked having me around. And you have to remember, this is an hour, and I was there for, and it wasn't that long, it was only a summer, which is 3 months. 3 months, I probably had the camera on, like 20 minutes a day, let's say. And but the rest of the day, I just sit there in their hotel rooms and hang out with them and talk to, it wasn't as if I came in and went, okay, well, and I have a handheld camera. So I don't have a camera crew or the microphone. It's not like Barbara Walter shows up with her hair and makeup crew. Klieg lights, let's go, here we are. It was just hanging out. I have a handheld camera that's, you probably all have better cameras when you go on vacation. Mine is really like consumer style camera, and I just sit and talk to people and then I edit them. So it's not what you're thinking of when you think of camera crews, you think of a different production value. As you can tell, this is very what you would call low budge, So it's a different access, and all those things didn't apply. You're talking about people that had nothing to lose. The only reason I'm here tonight is because when the Gates Foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Colin Mann from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation called me and said, we're raising awareness of homelessness, would you be willing to come out? I said, yeah, if you give money to the kids. So we're building it tonight. Every screening we have, we're trying to raise as much money for the kids as possible. And Seattle University, of course, they had to pitch in too. So, I'm trying to help them as much as I can.
And do you have plans in the future to follow up with any of the families?
I obviously have relationships with them still. I mean, I keep in constant contact.
You mean filmmaking plans?
Personal filmmaking, either way.
It would have to be, did you ever see that series like 7 Up? Yeah. You'd have to follow them for a long time. I mean, sometime we'd have to pass before. I mean, if you went back now, I could tell you what's going to happen. They're all exactly where I left them. I mean, I talked to a lot of them yesterday because I was coming here, so I was like, well, let's get the updates, let's call and find out. And it turns out that when the movie first aired on HBO, a lot of people donated a lot of money to families, personally. Like they fell in love with one, like Rudy or whatever, or Cassidy, and people sent money to that person or that family. But there's so many pieces of the puzzle that have to come together. To give money to these families, they might not necessarily know how to use it. They're not educated in how to manage their budget, and they may have squandered the opportunity to get out of the situation. So that's another part of the problem. You have all of these pieces of how to educate the people, how to sustain a life. So as you can imagine, they've gotten a lot of money, but it hasn't really helped.
Was that family ever able to move into the apartment, the one that was having the family?
The only family from the film that actually right now got out because of donations from the film, that's now living in an apartment, is Cassidy. The one with, she had lice and she saved her head. She was the one that, like, the devil from, remember, just living in the hotel? It's like, she's actually, her whole family's living in a hotel because a couple in Canada saw the film on HBO and decided to sponsor them, and is still sponsoring them. And this aired last summer, so they're still sponsoring them.
So out of the hotel?
Out of all of them. They've all gotten money, huge donations. And the school, of course, is still open because of the donations, because after they got cut off. But they're still open. But Cassidy's family is the only one that's managed to sustain. I'm not sure how long that's going to last, though.
How are they managing the money successfully? I mean, what sort of systems have been put into place at this point to help them manage the money successfully?
I think they're just not going to the mall. I mean, it's a terrible thing, but you know, a lot of times we gave money to the families, and then we would follow up, and they don't know how to budget. You saw they're working and they are making money, but they also have needs to have. People have kids. Anybody here have kids? It costs money. So you get a check and you're like, my kid needs new shoes. You saw Josh's shoes. They had holes in them. It's not as if they're going on shopping sprees and buying a Ferrari. They have needs for their kids. And so it's rent or new shoes for my kid who's walking around with holes in his shoes. So, of course, it's hard to manage food and gas and insurance, all these things. I mean, they were eating in soup kitchens, so they think, oh, I have a check. Maybe I can go have dinner tonight. So things like that. It's all very complicated. But and no one really figured out how to manage it, but Cassidy's mom figured out how to manage it. She also remarried a man that helped. That helped. A rich man always helps. Not rich, but a man with a job, you know, a better job. Women out there, keep yourself off the streets, a rich man.
Who else has a question? Go ahead.
Live there. No one in my family liked that idea very much because the bed bugs and the swine flu and all that. But you know, when you were growing up and your mother said to you, eat your dinner, there are kids starving in Africa. And the great thing was I got to show my kids, eat your dinner, there are kids starving in California. And I'm sure New York and all across America. And when my kids went back to their fancy New York preschool and they started saying to their friends, you know, my 2-year-old and my 3-year-old, eat your lunch, there are people starving in California. The teachers pulled me aside and they were like, this is not good. Like, you shouldn't be saying this to your kids. It's scaring some of the other kids. And I was like, honey, wake up. This is America. This is what's happening. So I think that for my kids to be raised with more, I grew up in sort of a more privileged situation, and I like that my kids, did I tell you, I was telling a group upstairs from the university that, you know, the reason I made this film was because I was walking down the street with my kid. You know, I live in New York, and so there are a lot more homeless kids on the street everywhere. And there's actually a very fancy clothing store in the lobby of where I live. And we're walking by, and there's a homeless man that lives there, just year-round. It's like 10 degrees right now, and he's just living there. And we know him, and he's there every day. And so my 2-year-old, 2 years old, just like learning how to talk, we're walking down the street. My 2-year-old says, Mommy, why is that man homeless? And I didn't have an answer. And so I thought, if my 2-year-old was asking me a question that, you know, we've all grown up and now we have our mechanisms for coping and seeing a homeless person and pretending he's not there or smiling to acknowledge he's there, but dealing with it so that we don't feel guilty or bad. You know, it's a complicated psychological thing where you have to walk by them and think, oh, that's a homeless person and I have a warm home to go to. It's complicated, right? But then my 2-year-old was asking me that and I couldn't answer, I thought. So I liked the gift that they gave me was the ability to raise my children in an environment where it's a part of the world they live in, and that they're conscious of that, and that we're not in denial. You know, there are a lot of people that are in denial about it.
You're not in Disneyland.
Right, we're not like taking my kids to, I took my kids to Orange County for a summer, but we didn't go inside Disneyland.
One last question. No, wrap it up. One last question. You make the call.
When this film was airing, I was in the back of the room with David from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and he said to me, whose phone is that Rudy's using? When she's calling her dad to say, I'm sick, and do you have gas so I can get home? And I'm like, oh, that was my cell phone. But don't tell anyone, because as a filmmaker, you're not supposed to give the subject the cell phone so that they can call, because she was so desperate. I mean, she'd been sitting there like that for let's say since like 10 in the morning, it was like 3 in the afternoon, and I felt bad. But I'm not allowed to just kidnap someone. I'm not authorized to put the kid in my rental car and drive her home. So I eventually gave in and gave her my cell phone. And so there's this complicated line of, do I help her? How can I help her? Can I take her places? That is a very complicated, very thin line, which you're never allowed to cross. And of course I crossed it. Of course college funds are really jumping away deep where you're never allowed to go. But so it's much more complicated than, let's just say, the NBC News handbook would not have approved of how I dealt in that situation. Because remember when I told you that I was living in the Reno Inn, which is where all these kids were living, and across from Disneyland, and then they were getting swine flu, and my husband was like, we're going to go to Northern California where my parents are. I'm going to take the kids out of here because he didn't like them living there. And I'm like, oh, I think we should stay. And we had this terrible incident where we took the kids, we went out to the soup kitchens at night with these families. Because what are we supposed to say? Like, we're going to the Cheesecake Factory, have fun at the soup kitchen? So we went with them, and we were eating at the soup kitchen again, and my 2-year-old was crying. This wasn't the 2-year-old that was like, why is that man homeless? This was like the younger one, who is now 2. And he was crying, and he was like, Mommy, I don't want to eat here. I don't like it here. Because you saw the soup kitchens had some nasty looking no judgment, but you know, some like more seasoned street veteran homeless style. And so I was like, oh, I was so angry at my 2-year-old. I was cursing. I'm like, that spoiled, rotten little, right? And my husband's like, he's 2, and he doesn't like the feeling he's getting at this place. Give him a break. So I'm like, fine. We moved across the street to the Residence Inn, and the Residence Inn, they have, I feel like I'm doing an ad for the Residence Inn, they have free breakfast. And then at night they have like a barbecue that's like open. So what I did was I was living, it's Disneyland, they have all these like nice hotels. So we ended up moving across the street. This was like in August, let's say I'd been there for 2 months. We moved to the Residence Inn, and then they're not really, there's no one at the door waiting to check your ID to go for the free breakfast or anything. So I started like bringing all the kids in for free breakfast. Talk about the line, NBC News handbook. And I was like, at one point, I looked around the room one morning and I was like, the entire room was full of like the kids from the hotel. It looked like I had 25 children. And so that was when I knew I had definitely broken all the rules of journalism.
Thank you.
No, thank you.